Good day, and welcome to another Answers Weekly Wraps. I am Viv Govender. This week, we're going to start off by covering the latest interest rate decisions from the Bank of Japan, Bank of England, as well as the US Fed. Then we're going to look at the situation with Iran and what the implications of that could be going forward. In our AI segment, we're going to look at jobs in two ways. Firstly, we're going to look at the extremely hot job market for AI scientists, especially with Meta's recent hiring spree. And then in the next part, we can look at the effect AI might have on the job market after a statement by the head of Amazon around what they expect for corporate headcount going forward. So let's start off with what's been happening with the Bank of Japan, England, as well as the US Fed and their interest rate decisions. To cut a long story short, they all kept interest rates basically flat. Now, why is this significant? Well, as I've always told you guys, there's only two things that really have shown a long-term consistent effect on stock market returns. They are interest rates and taxes. High interest rates tend to be bad for stock market returns, low interest rates tend to be good. The reason that we've had such a magnificent stock market over the last decade and a half was because after 2008, we saw interest rates globally effectively come down to zero. It's often called ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, ZIRP. But that obviously came to the end a little while ago with the inflation ramping up, and then we saw markets pull back quite significantly when interest rates went up again. Now that they're coming down, that is one of the reasons that we're seeing stock markets once more approaching highs, especially in the US. But what is the path forward? Well, with regards to interest rates, the central banks have to be very careful. The reason that they control interest rates is because they want to control inflation. That's their primary goal. Beyond everything else, that's the number one thing they want to be doing is controlling inflation. Now, if inflation basically goes up, they want to be able to increase interest rates to basically stop it. But the problem that they have is that interest rates work slowly. So let's just say they start seeing inflation going up like next month, and then they started raising interest rates the month or so after that. That's usually the case. Or they usually wait a couple, signals from the statisticians to see what interest rates are doing. They're not going to just go up and raise interest on just one signal, one inflation reading. They'll wait for a couple of readings to come out, and then they'll start acting. Well, firstly, because they have to wait for a few readings to act, they are going to be behind the trend already. Next, they don't raise interest rates immediately. They go on a cycle. They start raising it, 0.25% each time. Sometimes it's really, really extreme. They raise about 0.5%, and they do it over a period of a year plus sometimes. So we have an interest rate, action that's meant to deal with an inflation effect, but it's probably only going to fully be implemented a year plus after the inflation event happened. Then there's a well-known phenomena in economics called the monetary policy lag. This is the amount of time it takes for interest rates to rise before it has an effect on the economy. And by some estimates, that's another 6-9 months to maybe 2 years. So it could be that we have an inflation effect right now. So we have inflation spiking up in June 2025, and the actual effect of the policy to fight this 2025 June inflation could only fully come into effect maybe 3 years down the line, 2028. That's obviously a very bad way to do things. I mean, if you imagine steering a car, and every time you turn the steering wheel, every time you see something in front of you, it takes you a minute to turn the steering wheel, and then a minute after that or 2 minutes after that for the car to actually turn. How many things are you going to be hitting? How many things are you going to be avoiding? Very difficult. So the one thing that these guys don't want to be doing in the US Fed and other central banks out there is they don't want to be acting too quickly with regards to cutting interest rates if they fear that there might be a rise in inflation, and therefore there may be a need for them to increase interest rates. Because they cut interest rates right now, they could be just feeding into an inflationary cycle that they think they might identify, but they're not quite certain about yet. And that might be a issue going forward. And why would they think there might be inflation right now? There's two main things out there. Firstly, there is the Trump tariffs and some of the issues around that. And the second thing is obviously what's happening with Iran at the moment with regards to the tensions between them and Israel, and obviously the US as well, which has risen or raised oil prices significantly, more than $10 a barrel for Brent crude, for instance, over the last little while. This is a significant impact on the global economy because as much as we want to think about electric vehicles and renewable energy and so on, also makes a huge impact on inflation globally. Not just for personal transport, but transporting goods as well. You want to get something to a supermarket, it has to go usually on a truck to get to the supermarket. oil prices go up, the price of diesel for the truck goes up, the cost of transporting those goods go up. And you can see how that knock-on effect works out through the entire economy. So these central banks have to be very careful because they're seeing two things right now that are dangerous. Firstly, the tariffs, and secondly, this issue with Iran. And there's also the fear that we might be seeing some other effects happening because of what Trump is doing that is changing the way the global situation is working that might be negative. And some people even argue that some of these problems were appearing before the Trump administration, and they were pointing to certain indicators that were at the end of the Biden's term that was looking quite negative in terms of economic activity versus inflation. Okay, so that is interest rate policy. Next, let's look at one of the causes of this high inflation, possibly, which is the Israel-Iran situation. So what's been happening? Well, everyone that has been living under a rock knows that on October 7th, a couple of years ago, there was an attack by Hamas in Israel that killed maybe 1,000 or so people. It wasn't just normal killing; it was some pretty horrendous things happened there. Israel, obviously, quite shocked by that, attacked Hamas in Gaza, and it's been ongoing. In fact, I think in this week alone, we've seen over 100 people being killed in Gaza by the Israeli army, and this is 2 years later. You know what I mean? We're talking a significant amount of death has occurred there. By most estimates, somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people have died in Gaza. This is out of a population of about 2 million people, so we're talking maybe 5% of the population, which is quite significant. And obviously, if that many people have died, the number of injured and wounded, etc., will be higher. But Israel didn't just attack Gaza; they've used this particular event to galvanize support for them, especially from the US, to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then to help remove the Assad regime in Syria. And in the last 2 years or so, what's happened is that they have managed to effectively either destroy or significantly reduce the impact or the strength of their three closest enemies, which is the the government of Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, as well as Hamas in Gaza. And they've also used it at the same way to go after land, etc., in the West Bank, which is a different story. But now that they've kind of sorted out the near term or the near or close by enemies, they're looking at what they believe to be the head of the octopus, is what they call it, which is Iran. Iran has been financing, Hezbollah. They have helped out the Assad regime. They have been supportive of Hamas, etc. And now they think it might be an opportunity to go after Iran. There has also been, at the same time, in the last couple of weeks, a news story breaking out or some kind of report breaking out that says that Iran was a couple of weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Now, I don't know how much you can trust this, because you can find reports going back 30 years, I'm not even joking, 30 years to 1995 in the New York Times saying that Iran is 2 years away from a nuclear bomb, 30 years ago. So, and they still haven't had a nuclear bomb right now. So any report of a 2 week or a 1 month or whatever, this has been a constant refrain by, hawkish, Americans, Israelis, etc., for decades, that Iran is about to get a nuclear bomb in the next 6 months, the next year, in the next, couple of weeks in this case. And it's never happened. So that is, something just to be, keep in mind there. But for whatever the reason, Israel attacked Iran. Now, they've done, bombings in Iran before, very targeted things, and quite, complicated things. For instance, they had a target, for instance, in a certain room that he used to visit whenever he visited Iran. He used to go to certain, accommodation. And what they did was when they planted a bomb there, and then they waited months until he turned up again at that accommodation, and they blew it up. There's been assassinations of, scientists in Iran, nuclear scientists, because the idea here is that it's mostly about nuclear weapons for decades. We're talking about assassinations by people on motorbikes, bombs, that kind of stuff happening for decades. But now that we've seen, the attack by, Israel on Iran, Iran has responded. Now, Iran's response has been, more haphazard. They're not as powerful militarily, even though they're a much larger country. To give you an idea, Iran has about 9 times more people. Over 90 million people live in Iran. Its economy is larger than Israel's. They're not as rich as Israel per person, but they're still much more people. So about 3-4 times larger economy than Israel. And they are basically have responded, and they are much more powerful than, for instance, obviously Hamas or Hezbollah or even Assad's regime in Syria. And so they've been able to attack back. And even though there's a longer distance to cover from, for instance, Gaza to Israel, some of the stuff that they've done has gone through. Now, Israel has a thing called the Iron Dome, which is a protection over their country from missiles coming in, using their own missiles to like kind of shoot down other missiles and a bunch of other things. That's kind of held up to a certain extent, but it's not perfect. And the problem is that when you have enough stuff coming in, if you're not perfect, you're going to you have damage in your home country. I mean, we have seen a number of missiles getting through, and I think the hospital has been hit, etc. And there's been a few deaths and much larger number of casualties, people that have been injured, for instance. And at the same time, Israel has attacked back, and they've been sort of targeting things that they have never targeted before. For instance, some of the energy infrastructure in Iran, which is obviously Iran's lifeblood. Now, the thing is that I don't think Israel has the ability to really do to the Iranian regime what they've done to, for instance, Hezbollah, without the help of the US. And so there's been a campaign to get the Americans in on this. Now, for those that don't know about Trump's campaigning, a lot of the people that supported Trump were supporting him because he was the first president in his first term, US president in a long time, that had not gotten the US into a new war. Even Barack Obama got the US into wars. George W. Bush, as you know, you go back to Bill Clinton, it was George H.W. Bush. A lot of these kind of people were involved in new conflicts. But we have seen Trump kind of vacillating on this particular thing. He has come out and said, at one point in time, evacuate Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. He has said that, he will accept nothing other than surrender. There's not negotiations with Tehran. They must just surrender. And a number of other things that have been very hawkish. But at the same time, he hasn't really followed through with actual, military support for Israel as yet. What Israel really needs from the US apparently is what's called bunker buster bombs. So they need bombs that can kind of burrow into the ground and hit, targets that are underground. The reason for this is that not only are people underground, but there's also nuclear facilities underground that they want to, destroy. So that is the current situation now. What is the importance for the markets? Firstly, obviously we know about the oil price. Tensions between Iran and Israel go higher. Oil prices spike up. But why do they spike up? Well, Iran is a producer of oil, so that's important. But it's also in a region that's very important to global oil production. So they could attack, for instance, and they have attacked in the past, the Saudi production. And that's a huge amount of oil production that's even beyond what Iran produces. And more importantly, there's a piece of water just south of Iran called the Straits of Hormuz. A lot of oil from Iran, but a lot of other, Gulf states goes through the Straits of Hormuz to get to places like India, South Korea, China, Japan, a hugely important part of the world's economy, which is why this is even more important, you would think, just on the Iran-Israel situation, because it's bringing together, conflicting interests for China and for the US. If the US basically continues to support Israel and China starts to think that maybe this is a way to stop supply of oil to the Chinese, and quite frankly, the amount of oil that goes to the Chinese as well as the Indians through the Straits of Hormuz is extremely significant. Neither of those economies could easily handle that piece of water being closed off. There are ways around it, but they're not anywhere near the capacity that is needed to basically replace what's currently going through the Straits of Hormuz. So we are seeing a number of Asian countries looking at what's happening here with creative interest. The Chinese have tried to calm things down, but I've talked about this before. There is a political kind of succession battle going on in China right now. Xi Jinping seems to be falling in terms of power and being replaced by a new leader, a new military leader. And I think maybe this time is quite difficult for the Chinese to handle two things, or three things rather. One of which is the trade war with the US. Then there's this succession debate, and then there's going to be, of course, this danger of what's happening with Iran right now. Another thing with Iran is it's very close to China. I mean, if you look at the map, Iran is just a country away from China. And that means that if there is issues in Iran, and for instance, becomes a new Iraq or a new Syria, where you have, the emergence of, militias and, terrorist, organizations, etc., that would be quite troublesome for the Chinese. I mean, they have had their own terrorism problems with the Uyghurs, the extent of that is debatable, but there has definitely been some, attacks in China, and they don't want that to occur. They want, a more stable neighborhood. It would be like, for instance, the U.S. getting concerned about a country just south of Mexico, having a blow up here, being caused by the Chinese. Can you imagine that? So that is the situation there. So the danger we have right now is that oil prices are going higher, but more importantly is that if things progress any further than this, we might see the Chinese and the Americans both being dragged into the conflict. And that is how you turn what is, a regional small conflict into something much more significant. And that could be very impactful in the global economy. Now, moving on to AI, we're talking about AI jobs from two aspects. Firstly, news has broken out that Meta is hiring people at unbelievable salaries. And I mean truly unbelievable salaries. We are talking about, some people getting 10 plus million, some people getting $100+ million in terms of, paychecks. There was a case of Scale AI that was, bought out by Meta for about $14 billion in order to get, a hold of effectively the leadership and some of their, staff members. Effectively, once they did that, other companies have actually pulled back from Scale AI's, business. Because obviously it wasn't just supplying Meta, it was supplying a number of other companies out there, and that's kind of, to a certain extent, really kneecapped the company. But the senior leadership, are now working for Meta, and trust me, they're not just going to be getting the once a paycheck from the Scale AI, deal. They're going to be having, other paychecks coming through as well. Why is this important? Well, you don't go around offering, $10 million to $100 million pay packages unless you are really desperate for talent, unless you have either a belief that you're falling behind or you have a belief that you're really close to the end. Now, a couple of things to note here. Jan LeCun, the guy that runs Meta's AI division, is one of the greatest AI skeptics out there, shockingly. He's one of the people out there that you always see saying that AI is not that great, it's not going to be that important, blah, blah, blah. And so maybe that is a case where Mark Zuckerberg got tired of the person in charge of the AI division being very pessimistic with AI and maybe not being as aggressive. Now, Jan LeCun is extremely credentialed. He has a solid history in AI, research. Most of what AI is right now was developed by him. So he's not a nobody. But maybe in this case, it's a case of maybe he's older, maybe a case that he doesn't have the, the right attitude that they want. Maybe that's a case that's what is happening here, where they need to get new people in. It could also be that maybe Meta is looking at falling behind in what's happening with OpenAI, with Google, etc., and says, maybe we're just going to catch up, and if we have to spend $1 billion or $15 or $20 billion to do it, not that bad. And look, Meta has taken these big punts in the past. The metaverse, they spent $50+ billion in the metaverse before reversing and basically, ignoring that, $50 billion. So, for $10-20 billion is not a big deal for this company. But I do think that's one possibility. The other possibility is that we are, approaching a point in which, the people that get ahead are going to stay ahead. And in that scenario, if you do spend that extra money and get ahead or get competitive at this stage, it could, result in huge dividends in the future. And that may be what they're doing. Now, speaking of jobs, we also had a report by, towards the head of Amazon, Jassy, where he basically came out and had a little statement saying effectively that in his view, in a few years' time, he expects the headcount at Amazon to be down because of what's being allowed by AI and robotics, etc. And that's quite interesting. I mean, we have seen the purchase of robotics companies. I mean, robotics, by the way, I think is the next step. We've seen the AI companies, we've seen the chip companies do really well. The one thing in the spot next is what's going to really feed into robotics. Not just the chips are going to matter, it's going to be the motors that operate the robots, etc., that are going to be quite interesting. But anyway, he comes out and talks about the fact that Amazon is predicting in a couple of years' time their staff count is going down. We have already seen Microsoft cut down, it's got several percent of their staff. And this is a big change from how these companies used to be in the past. You go back a few years ago and look at articles about how tech companies treated their workers, and they were incredibly indulgent. Because Google was giving their workers 1 day a week off to go do whatever they want to do, 20% off your time to do what you want to do. They were giving huge perks, high salaries. But things have changed. They're still giving high salaries, but only to a specific cohort of workers. Well, if you're not in a certain favored space, which is particularly AI, things are not looking anywhere near as good for you. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.